Hi everyone, if you're here, you're because you want to do well on your 7th grade Unit 2 Exploration and Colonization test. This is a big test. There's a lot of topics, but I'm going to try and break everything down to do a quick review so that you guys can do really well on the test. Let's start with some exploration vocabulary. The way back when we talked about exploration, here's the vocabulary terms that you're going to need to know in order to do well. First of all, Renaissance. Renaissance is that period of rebirth in Europe when Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Donatello, all those historic painters and sculptors all of a sudden had new ideas about what life meant and what the world was really like. This is the time period where they realized that the earth was round and that it may be possible to sail west from Europe and still get to Asia. Missionaries are people sent to convert others to their religion. So many countries, particularly Spain, when Spain starts to explore, one of their goals is God, one of the 3 G's. And their goal is to have the Native Americans that are living in these distant lands convert to Christianity. And so they become missionaries, people sent to convert others to their religion. Sailors used a tool called the astrolabe. The astrolabe is a tool that sailors would use to figure out the latitude of the ship, and by figuring out the latitude, they could correctly plot the course that they were sailing on. Remember, when you get out into the middle of the ocean, you can't see land. It's very easy to get disoriented. The Columbian Exchange is the movement of products between North America, South America, Europe, and Africa. So remember that ships were traveling between all of these continents and trading goods between these continents. So things that existed in Europe but didn't exist in North America were traded for things that existed in North America but didn't exist in Europe. The bad part of the Columbian Exchange was that diseases were brought to the Americas, and the Native Americans were killed by those diseases. Many Native Americans were killed by diseases that they had no immunity to, that only existed in Europe. But also, horses were introduced to Native Americans, and that changed the way Native Americans lived. Foods such as pumpkins and turkeys came back to Europe for the first time, all because of the Columbian Exchange. The magnetic compass helped sailors find the direction of magnetic north, and it was helpful when you can't see land. You could figure out which way was north, and if you can figure out which way was north, you could figure out the other directions and help you plot your path to get where you wanted to get. Caravel ships were small but highly maneuverable ships that were built by the Portuguese. The Portuguese were fantastic sailors, and they kind of led and pioneered the age of exploration. But the biggest guy that we talked about was Christopher Columbus. While Columbus may not have been the first to be in the Americas, he is remembered to be the most influential because of what happened after he arrived in the Americas. But originally, he wanted to find a way to Asia by sailing west from Europe. He thought it was going to be shorter than going all the way around the bottom of Africa. So Christopher Columbus is looking for a way to Asia, and he wants to sail west from Europe. He thinks it's only going to take a month. It turns out to take over 2.5 months, almost 3 months. But Christopher Columbus had a big impact on the world. For one, Europe learns about the Americas. Before Columbus sails back and starts talking about what he's discovered, even though he's still convinced he's in Asia, people start reading his accounts, and Europe learns about these new continents. Eventually, Amerigo Vespucci goes over, realizes this is not Asia, this isn't the East Indies. Instead, this is a brand new continent that has never been discovered before, and they name it the Americas after Amerigo Vespucci. But not only does Europe learn a lot about the Americas, but there's also some negative impacts on the world. For one, Native Americans begin to lose land. Settlers come in, take over their land, and are also killed by diseases that they have no immunity for, just like we said before. Spain creates colonies in the Caribbean islands and South America. Remember that Spain was only after one thing. Spain was after gold. They wanted to become rich. In addition, they also wanted to convert the Native Americans to Christianity. But the biggest thing that happened because of Christopher Columbus is that trade develops between many countries, new products, new foods. We call this the Columbian Exchange. Later, it develops into triangular trade. So if we're talking about exploration, we can think of it as a simple cause and effect. The cause is that European explorers are sent to North and South America. Spain, France, England, Portugal all sends explorers to North and South America. What happens as a result? Well, it's what we just talked about. New foods for both sides of the ocean. Africans are brought as slaves, and Native American populations destroyed by diseases. Moving into colonization, there are a couple vocabulary words that we definitely need to know for colonization. One is a charter, and a charter is just a legal document giving a person or a group permission to settle that new colony. The Puritans got a charter from the king, created the Massachusetts Bay Company, and started the Massachusetts Bay Colony. A colony is a group of people that settles in a distant land that is ruled by the government of their native land. Massachusetts, the Puritans, the Pilgrims, that was one of the colonies. Also, England starts a colony in Jamestown. That's another colony. Parliament is a representative government in England. It has two houses. They were the ones that passed the laws. And as we talk about the upcoming revolution, Parliament's going to play a big role in that. When it comes to colonization, there are a few things you have to keep in mind. One is that France was all about the fur trade, and that's easy to remember because they both start with F. France is all about the fur trade. The Virginia House of Burgesses we talked about was the first form of representative democracy. This is where they elected representatives to make decisions for the colony of Virginia. Another form of representative democracy was the Mayflower Compact. These were the Pilgrims, the Puritans, up on the Mayflower in Massachusetts. During the Mayflower Compact, Pilgrims agreed to work together to make their colony successful. The Puritans wanted to separate from the Church of England. Remember, they wanted to purify the Church of England. They wanted to separate. They wanted to start a colony where they would not be persecuted for their beliefs. Jamestown is the first permanent English colony. It was set up in 1607 on the James River, but there were many problems in the early days of Jamestown. For example, the colonists refused to work. All they wanted to do all day long was just look for gold. They didn't want to help farm. They didn't want to help take care of the what needed to be done in order to survive. They set up Jamestown on was an area where it was kind of swampy, and so the drinking water nearby was impure. That was another problem that plagued the early colonists in Jamestown. And then the third thing was diseases. There was no doctors, there was no medicine. If they got sick, kind of just took over, and most of the time they died. So a lot of the colonists died from diseases as well. When we talk about the British colonies, we talk about three main regions. We have the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. The New England colonies included Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire. The Middle colonies included New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. The Southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. When we think about the New England colonies, we think about kind of rocky soil, difficult to farm, short growing season, very cold winters. But they are right along the coast, so they do have some natural ports that made trading very easy. The Middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, known as the breadbasket. A lot of farming, a lot of grains were grown there. The Southern colonies is a much warmer climate, very long growing season. As a result, tobacco, rice, indigo, cotton are all grown there because of the long growing season. The Southern colonies, in addition, is where slavery develops because of the need for lots of agricultural workers to work these large fields, the large plantations. You need to know a few of the who started each colony and why they started it. Rhode Island was started by the Puritans that were kicked out of Massachusetts. Remember, they spoke up against the leaders of the Puritans. The Puritans didn't like that, forced them to leave. They started a new colony south called Rhode Island. Pennsylvania is formed by William Penn. He was a Quaker. The Quakers don't believe in fighting, and they also allowed freedom of worship. So anyone of any religion could come to Pennsylvania and live in peace. Georgia, started by James Oglethorpe. He wanted a place for debtors to settle. Debtors are people that are owe a lot of money, and typically are put into what's called debtor's jail in England, and you want a place for them to be able to start fresh. Maryland, started by Lord Baltimore. He wanted a place for Catholics to settle, to be able to practice religious freedom. Those are the main ones that you need to know. Other little tidbits that you need to remember about the British colonies for the test is that Native Americans were mostly killed because of disease. Disease was the big killer for Native Americans. The Pilgrims came to America. Their goal was to practice their religion freely without the threat of jail by the king. And that New York, which is also known as Hudson River Valley, was first called New Amsterdam, and it was settled by the Dutch. That is very important for the test. The last topic on the test is slavery. And slavery is something we talked about a little bit towards the end of the unit. The one vocab word that you definitely need to know is the Middle Passage, and the Middle Passage being enslaved Africans crammed below deck, chained on the ships, and brought to the Americas. They were forced here against their will. The conditions aboard the ships were very, very poor, very low sanitation. They were not allowed above deck most of the time, except briefly to wash off. The smell, the stench below deck was absolutely horrible. Diseases spread very quickly because of the no sanitation. Food wasn't good. But slaves were needed for agricultural work in the southern colonies, and that's why slavery developed in the Americas. The southern colonies being Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. So slaves were doing the agricultural work. These large farms, the plantations, they needed lots of workers. Slave traders were the ship captains. They made lots of money by buying and selling slaves. They were in it for money. Because they got lots of money is why they were slave traders. But they also treated slaves very badly because they didn't view them, the Africans, as people. They viewed them as property or as animals. Slaves lived on plantations, which are large farms in the South, and they had many different jobs. So it wasn't just for working in the farm. There were slaves that worked in the house, that worked in carpenter shops, worked with the blacksmith. Anything that the masters or the owners needed, they would learn those jobs, or they'd be forced to learn those jobs without much choice. So there you have it. This is the quick review of Unit 2, Exploration and Colonization. Watch this video a couple times. Go through the notes that I put on the screen, and you should do really well on this test.